With the Infiniti G35 and the Nissan 350Z becoming more and more popular every year, there's a lot more people interested in the VQ35 under the hood. Over the years, Nissan improved upon the original VQ35DE with the rev-up engine and then later down the line the heavily revised HR version. Now for the most part, it's pretty clear that the HR is significantly better than the DE engine, but there is a lot of confusion about the differences between the two and how the HR is better than the DE. So today we're going to compare the VQ35DE to the VQ35HR. From the outside looking in, it might seem like the DE and the HR are pretty similar engines. After all, they're both 3.5 liter V6s, they both have dual overhead cams, they both have variable valve timing, an all aluminum design, and they're both part of the VQ engine family. On top of that, they both output right around 300 horsepower, although there is a notable 20 horsepower difference between the two. Underneath it all, there are quite a few differences between the HR and the DE, and according to Nissan, about 80% of the parts are different from the DE to the HR. Now, just so that there's no confusion, I'm briefly going to cover the rev-up engine, that way we can reference the standard DE for the rest of the video. In the case of the 350Z, the standard VQ35DE was used from when it was new up until 2005. In 2005, Nissan began offering the rev-up version of this engine, which had its power increased from 287 horsepower to 300 horsepower. It's important to note that for the 350Z in 2005, only the 35th anniversary edition with the 6-speed manual and the track edition had the 300 horsepower motor. There's a lot of confusion on the internet that all 2005 6-speed models got the rev-up engine, but it was just the anniversary and the track editions, not the lower models such as the enthusiast model, which is what my personal 350Z is. It's really easy to tell if your engine is a DE or a rev-up engine just by looking at the timing cover. On the rev-up engine, there's going to be 2 bumps per side on the timing cover because of the fact that the rev-up has dual variable valve timing. Now, this is different than the standard DE, which does not have dual variable valve timing. It only has variable valve timing on the intake cam. The addition of the dual variable valve timing system means that the rev-up has a completely different wiring harness and a different ECU to control everything, and the addition of dual variable valve timing is what allows it to make so much more horsepower than the standard DE model. There are other notable changes on the rev-up engine, but I don't really want to get into them in this video because this video is meant to be the standard DE versus the HR. So for the rest of the video, we're going to reference the standard DE engine as much as we can. Now, that dual variable valve timing system I just mentioned can also be found on the VQ35HR, and it's what allows it to be so much more efficient and produce much more peak horsepower than the standard DE. The VVT system uses hydraulically actuated continuously variable valve timing for the intake cams and an electromagnetic actuated cam phaser on the exhaust side. The system offers a high degree of flexibility in setting valve timing to improve combustion efficiency over a very wide RPM range. The really nice feature about the variable valve timing on the exhaust side is that it adds a much wider and flatter torque band compared to the DE. This is really good because for the most part on the street, you're really not revving your engine out like crazy. You're going to be somewhere in the low to mid RPM range. So on the HR, it's a much more drivable engine because it has that wider torque range thanks to the variable valve timing on the exhaust. As one of the ways to minimize friction, Nissan used a hydrogen-free diamond-like carbon coating for the valve lifters, also known as DLC. To put it simply, the DLC coating reduces friction by up to 40%, and at the time that the HR came out, it was the first production engine ever to use this coating. If you were to visually compare a DE to an HR, the most obvious difference would be the intake system. On the DE, you have a singular intake with a single throttle body going into the intake plenum. Whereas on the HR, you have a dual intake system. So you have 2 throttle bodies, 2 intake tubes, 2 air filters. According to Nissan, this reduces intake restriction by up to 18%, but I'm not exactly sure how true that is because they didn't really provide any real numbers. Now, one of the really well-documented issues with the standard DE is the poor intake plenum design. Unfortunately, due to the design of the intake plenum, basically all cylinders don't get an even amount of air. This results in just less overall power, and it also means if you were to do something like a dry shot of nitrous around the throttle body, it's not going to have an even amount of nitrous going into each cylinder. By the time Nissan was developing the HR, they were well aware of this issue, and it's not something that you'll find on the HR. The easy solution to fix this issue on the DE is to add an intake plenum spacer, which solves the issue for the most part. Now, looking at the cylinder block, it would appear that the DE and the HR use the same block because they are both 3.5 liters and constructed from cast aluminum. but they're totally different. And starting with the actual material, the HR is cast with a stronger material than the DE. I think it goes without saying that the harder material makes the HR block stronger, which ultimately means it can handle more peak power with the right modifications. Interestingly enough, the HR block is also slightly taller. Now the block height was increased for a number of reasons, but it was mostly done to decrease the angle of the connecting rods. By extending the height of the block, they also needed to extend the length of the connecting rod, which means that the angle of the connecting rod is decreased, which reduces piston to wall friction. Now it's important to note that the block is taller and the connecting rods are longer, but the stroke is left the same. All of this ultimately reduces friction and allows the HR to rev slightly higher. Another really interesting feature on the HR is that it has asymmetrical pistons to further reduce piston to wall friction. Another notable difference with the pistons is that the DE has 10.3 to 1 compression ratio and the HR uses a 10.6 to 1 compression ratio. Now this difference is very small, but any increase in compression ratio is going to lead to a more efficient engine and more power. And by today's standards, that 10.6 to 1 compression ratio really is not all that high. Moving further down the engine, we have the crank and the crank caps. Now, one of the engines that all high revving engines face is crank deformation, crank walk, and overall block rigidity issues. As RPMs increase, load on pretty much everything that holds the crank to the block greatly increases. When Nissan was designing the HR, they wanted to increase maximum RPM and also decrease vibration. They did this by adding a ladder frame to the bottom of the HR. To put it simply, adding a ladder frame to support the crank greatly improves rigidity, reduces vibration, and greatly reduces friction at high RPM. Now, as I mentioned earlier, about 80% of the parts between the DE and the HR are different and non-interchangeable. All of the changes were designed to make the HR more fuel efficient and make more power. And this is proven by the fact that the HR is upwards of 10% more fuel efficient than the DE, at least according to Nissan. That being said, the DE is definitely not a bad engine. And at the time that it came out, it was a really, really good engine. And the VQ family as a whole has gotten a lot of awards over the years. Like I said at the start of the video, it's pretty obvious that the HR is the better engine. It's more efficient, it makes more power, it has dual variable valve timing, unless you're talking about a rev up DE. It has dual intakes and it's stronger. At the end of the day, it's just an evolution of the VQ35DE, although they really don't share all that many parts. It was designed to be better in every single way, and there's really nothing wrong with the design changes that Nissan made. The only downside to the HR is the fact that it's more expensive to buy secondhand. And that's mostly due to perceived value and availability. Now, if you wanted to build some sort of really cheap boosted engine, the DE might be the better choice, simply for the fact that when it blows up, you're going to be able to get one a little bit cheaper. And also parts are just slightly more available for the DE compared to the HR. But that being said, the HR is better in pretty much every single way. But I do not want you guys to just take my word for it. So down in the description below, I've linked some official Nissan PDF documents that go over all the differences between the HR and the DE. And it really helps explain how the HR is better. While you guys are down there, I would really appreciate it if you dropped a comment and let me know which one you think is better, DE, rev up, or HR. And let me know why. While you're also down there, be sure to hit the thumbs up button because it really helps the video, and subscribe so you guys don't miss out on any future videos. And I'll see you guys in the next one.